Hi, thanks for joining us. My name is Katrina Michelle. I am co-producer of When Lightning Strikes film. It's a film about the unsexy side of awakening. And I'm here with my co-producer, Kate West. And today we're continuing our series of interviews with some very interesting people who've had some very interesting awakening stories. And I'm going to turn it over to Kate to talk a little bit more about today's guest.
All right. So hi, everyone. Nice to be here with you. I'm really excited to have Dani Antman with us today, who has become my friend. And there's a very interesting story about how we met, but I will start by introducing you. Dani is an internationally known energy healer and interface minister based in Santa Barbara, California. She has been at the forefront of energy medicine healing since 1992, when she graduated from the Barbara Brennan School of Healing. Dani was a senior teacher at the School for Non-Dual Healing and Awakening for over 9 years and has led workshops at the Esalen Institute, La Casa de Maria, which is a beautiful place, and the Lionheart Institute for Transpersonal Energy Healing. She's dedicated to helping others progress on their spiritual paths, and you can visit her website at www.wiredforgod.com, which we will leave in the links below. So Katrina and I are on this journey of making this film When Lightning Strikes, based on our mutual interest in the topic of spiritual emergency, awakenings, and the sort of often appreciated and left outside of the integration process, which is something that we don't really hear much about, and has been a part of my life for the last 3 years after a massively painful Kundalini awakening where it just turned my life completely upside down and made me not recognize myself, like bedridden type of thing. And so we've embarked on this journey to make this film to explore these different phenomenon and find some answers and continue to ask questions. And so it really comes out of that curiosity that we've been in touch with people like Dani and the others that we've interviewed. And so it's very exciting when I come across something that's like new information, because it feels like I kind of exhausted the resources that were out there. Hi, Dani. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, hi there. Hi, Katrina. Hi, Kate.
Good to be with you.
The same. And I miss you here on the West Coast. So.
I miss being on the West Coast. I think it would be cool to share a little bit about how we got to know each other. Mm-hmm. And it was basically through this interview series that Katrina and I kept putting forth, even though our plans for filming got halted because of coronavirus. We started doing our interviews online. And I think it was the interview with Lawrence Edwards that you saw.
Yep.
You emailed me, or you Facebook messaged me, and it went into my spam folder, and I didn't see it until I went to message you because someone had mentioned you. And then I Googled you and realized that Katrina and I had been in a bookstore like the year before on our first trip to California when we were just starting to film When Lightning Strikes, and your book like literally fell off the shelf in our lap, and we were like, what? Like, this is what? And then for some reason didn't buy it.
It just disappeared.
And then a whole year later, someone's mentioning you to me, and then I Google you, go to message you on Facebook, find your message to me, and it turns out you were 20 minutes away in Santa Barbara, and we met the next day. So, so it's cool how things like that work, and I love how this project continues to evolve in that way and connect us with the people that are just meant to be on our path and continuing the next stage and the next stage and the next stage of this journey. And I'm excited to talk with you because personally you've connected me with some information that I didn't have about this journey, and I thought I knew everything because I've been on an all-out search for 3 years of like trying to figure out what's going on. And I think that's what you said to me in your message. You said, I would be interested in talking. I think I might have a piece that you haven't heard before, and it's true. So there's a lot we could talk about, but where should we begin?
That's a good question. I mean, I can tell people a little bit about my background. I didn't consider myself on a path of awakening till much later in life. I think I was around maybe 40s or late 30s. And what got me really excited when I was about 30 was this healing training that I started with Barbara Brennan, who wrote Hands of Light. And it gave me a window into the underlying energies and nature of reality. that I always sort of was a bystander, sort of armchair traveler reader I always had curiosity about esoteric things, but I never thought that I would actually investigate it for myself. I was entranced with Carlos Castaneda as a very young girl and other things that were more magical than spiritual, I would say. So when I got to Barbara Brennan's, this whole world opened up of healing, energy healing, and learning about the subtle body, which is the auric field or the energy body that surrounds all people and plants and things, and learning how to work with it actually opened me up spiritually, because I had to do my own healing to actually attend the school, surprising as that might be. I thought everything was fine, and the healing school was a 4-year training, and it kind of versed my life open in so many ways. Psychotherapy, emotional stuff, baggage coming up. So for me, the process of healing oneself is kind of intertwined with spiritual opening. And I think that's how it should be, because I've had this nice gradual curve towards awakening. And a lot of my early healing work was done through therapy and through the healing school. We were required to be in therapy, which is very unusual for an energy healing school, because Barbara knew your stuff is going to come up if you open. And it's really good to have the psychotherapeutic framework as well as the energy framework. And when I work with people that way.
Right.
So I'll just pause for a sec if you have a question about this little piece, either one of you actually.
So Dani, I think it's really interesting how the Barbara Brennan School prepared you not only spiritually and energetically, which is what many of us associate Barbara Brennan with, is with the energy work, but also psychologically. That's actually something that I wasn't aware of, and something that I think is a really key part of this process that we described colloquially as awakening. Because I think so much of it in my framework is really just about another level of human development. It's your consciousness opening and expanding. And we use these words spiritual and we kind of put it in a box, but really it's just a new level of expansion into our human capacities. So I'm so happy to hear that the school that's been around that long was integrating the psych work from the beginning. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck, because we're told, you just, keep meditating in your corner and everything will be fine. But really, there are a lot of tools that you need.
Right. I haven't seen that too often, where it's just fine without this other level of work. And I must say, at that period of time, we were introduced to body-oriented psychotherapy. It was core energetics work. And it was I had no previous experience with talk therapy. So my first therapy was body-oriented. And it was very interesting to have the two parallel, because usually the psychological integration came after, for me, after the body moved and opened in some energetic way. And then I would run back to the therapist and go, blah, 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 my mother, my father, and I would start to integrate all the underlying causes. But it was because we were being opened energetically through healings that we were practicing on each other. And Barbara was she's still alive, but she's not the head of the school at the moment. But she was a very, very, very precise clairvoyant. And when somebody can see you that clearly, you open, because it's like you can't hide in a false self. You couldn't hide in a false self in front of her. And it jump-started your process in a way that perhaps talk therapy alone, it would have taken years. Because she would just read you and say, your mother did this, your father was like this, it's stuck in your third chakra, and this is what you need to do. Or she'd put her hands on you and boom, you'd be in tears in 3 seconds, right? So it's very, very powerful. The one drawback, I would say, which I didn't really consider until much later on when I studied trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, is that for some people it was way too much. And it wasn't until I started to study PTSD that I understood that I kind of needed a whole different approach in understanding that with the energy work. And I've integrated that, continue to integrate that with continued studies for trauma healing, because that's a whole different ball game. And I just want to say here, maybe we'll come back to it a little later, that when you have a really intense Kundalini awakening, very often it could be because of early trauma, or it can excavate early trauma. It could be one or the other or both. And I've been really interested lately in working as a healer, helping people cope with that kind of integration, because I've done a lot of training with trauma healing.
Yeah, somatic experiencing practitioner.
Right. That was I studied with Peter Levine and completed the somatic experiencing training, and then I've done a couple of other trainings in working with pre-birth trauma, post-birth trauma, and some other things.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think it's definitely like what's needed when people have these openings, especially in the Kundalini process, where the sort of whole point of it is to purify these samskaras, whatever we want to call them, to have tools to go there and to really be supported in that way. Feels critical. Feels like
it does. It is critical. There's an interesting book. It was written by some therapists after this person's death. It's called Collision with the Infinite. And I forgot the name of the author.
Yeah.
But this woman had a huge opening into vastness right away, like no middle steps. And the opening lasted for many years until she got, she became aware of early abuse in her life. And then it seemed to the people around her that her awakening sort of closed down. I don't know if that's really true. I think maybe her attention needed to shift inward in a different way. But she then unfortunately died through a brain tumor. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to know, what's causal in all of that. But it's interesting that she had many years of what looked like very stabilized process, and then it went off the rails maybe 5-6 years later, because something needed to come up and be seen and healed.
Right. And just the awareness that that's what's happening in a process is so key, because otherwise you just may think you're going absolutely insane.
She did, and she went to so many people seeking answers, so many people. And it really took her a long time to even accept what was happening to her.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So I'd love to ask you a little bit more about your process. I know that you said that your kind of journey started a little bit more midlife, and I'd just love to hear a little bit more about where you've been since you first began that process.
Right. The kind of 3 major sections of what I consider my awakening process. One was the Barbara Brennan School, and afterwards, after I graduated, I followed a teacher who started his own school. He was at the Barbara Brennan School, and he was investigating Jewish mysticism. So I was very intrigued with that, and he had been someone I knew pretty well before he started the school. Found him trustworthy, and he seemed to know how to know God to me. He seemed to have that kind of connection. So I started another 4-year training in Kabbalistic healing, which was learning about the tree of life and its qualities and how to use it for healing of the body, mind, and soul through hands-on healing. And I really opened even more there. The work was profound, and the healing work, it felt very God-oriented to me. The tree of life has 10 attributes that are said to be names of God. So when you use them, you're cleaving to divine states. Mm. And it was less about fixing someone and more about perhaps transmitting a kind of flavor of divinity that matched the person's need in the moment. Mm. That would be an easy way of talking about it. And I felt like my soul was at home. I just felt that this particular path really spoke to me. Its language spoke to me. I did a tremendous amount of study on my own, because everything I read in English, at least, I don't read Hebrew too well, it's a complete system of thought, Kabbalistic thought, from how the world was formed to our role as human beings in the world, and, you know, what healing is and what a good life looks like and what integration looks like. And I still do this work and love it. I became a teacher at the school, as Kate said, for 9 years. And, you know, I really found my place. I found my place in the world, in my own being, did more self-healing, and everything was perfect. And yet, a little voice was whispering in my head that something was going to change. And it happened through just a sense of deep, deep, deep fatigue. And I was feeling like I was getting what we call healer burnout a bit. And I didn't know what was wrong. I wasn't particularly outwardly sick. I just didn't quite feel right. Started to see practitioners. And at that same time, the teacher was following his own longing and creating and investigating other methods of meditating and doing spiritual practice and introducing them to the students and the teachers. And I just couldn't resonate with these new practices. I really tried. I did like 1.5 years worth of training in them. I found that they irritated my brain, my brain circuits. Something felt off and difficult for me. And you know, as much as I wanted to be the good student, and I was teaching, so I thought, I'm gonna have to teach this, I better like it, I couldn't get on board with the program. And when I was looking at that from an objective point of view, I thought, oh, this is interesting. So you're a senior teacher, you can't do the practices, either you're very backward or something's off, or I don't know what's going on, but you know, what's gonna happen to your job, kind of thing. And I started to pray for guidance really, really deeply, because by this time, I knew I was on a spiritual path, and I knew I wanted awakening by this point in time. I didn't exactly know what that was. And I was not having any obvious Kundalini symptoms like Kate, you were describing. I was just stuck. And everything on the outside looked great. So go figure, right? It was something that came from a very, very deep inner knowing that I didn't even really want to hear. And 2 weeks after I started to pray, I met an Indian Swami by hearing from a friend that he was in New York City and that we could go to a 2-day weekend presentation, and it was about Kundalini. So I knew nothing about Kundalini. I actually had to look it up before the weekend started. And the morning of, I actually saw an ephemeral figure in an orange robe at the foot of my bed in my room as I was waking up, just like a fleeting image. Didn't think much of it. Walked into the room, and there was the person that I had seen in the morning, early morning hours. Wow. And the presentation was very, very detailed. It was unlike anything I had ever heard about spiritual awakening or Kundalini. And by the second day, Swamiji, his full name is Swami Chandrasekharanand Saraswati, and he has since passed. But by the second day, he was talking about a particular way that the Kundalini could rise that was common to Jewish people that he had met, and that was a challenging rising and actually needed esoteric methods to be redirected. It wasn't in the right channel. And when he described some of the symptoms of a block in this rising, he was pretty much the gifts and the blocks, because I had both the gifts of the rising and the blocks within this rising. He pretty much described me. My mouth dropped open, and he saw that, and he looked at me, and I knew he knew that I knew that I had this rising. And before I left, he asked me, so what rising do you think you have? And it's called the Vajra Nadi rising. And it's one of 6 possibilities. So of course, when you hear something about yourself, you go boom, like you said, Kate, oh, help, yes, right? But it's really one of 6 possibilities. And all those 6 have different gifts and different obstacles. So when now, because I'm familiar with that, when I read awakening stories, I often think, well, which rising do they have? I'm not trained to diagnose that, but I know that different people have different symptoms and gifts because of their risings. Mm-hmm. And if I were trained, I would pretty much be able to kind of tell that story. It's a lineage that requires proper training. So I was so stunned that I filled out what is called a 3 history report. You have to write about your life in all its minutiae and detail, spiritual experiences and physical health and mental health and dreams. So you fill out a huge report, submit it, and if you wish, you can follow that up with a 2-week retreat. And I was in the car going for that retreat very, very quickly because I knew that my prayers had been answered and I had found something that felt quite real. And I went on it was actually a 2-week retreat and was given a practice, a yoga practice that was geared to my system. It was not a group practice. It came out of this evaluation. And on the second, or I think it was the 3rd day of the retreat, there was a noticeable shift. And the shift felt to me like my energy and consciousness going up through a dark purple ground that had a green light in the middle. Mm-hmm. And my consciousness shot up through the light. It like went like a rocket. And I went into a bliss state and basically couldn't move and couldn't talk for quite some time. And I knew that the rising had shifted into the central column where it belongs, and that it had progressed to here, which is a stable point. It's above the middle of Ajna chakra. And at that point, I was elated. I mean, it felt very, very sacred. It felt blissful. If I weren't educated in this system, I would have thought I would have thought that I was finished. It was ecstatic, really. But that didn't last very long. So maybe I should pause here for a minute and see if you have some questions. Yeah.
Wow, I mean, it's just so beautiful to hear you speak about your experience and the not knowing and suddenly the recognition and somebody helping you in your process to open up even more and move things more into alignment so that you can come into more fullness. And I also think it's really beautiful to note how fleeting those states can be. Mm-hmm. And how that's part of the process. You know, sometimes we're in the pain of it, like Kate talks about, sometimes we're in the bliss of it. And even when we're in the bliss of it, we have to be aware that those states are ever changing and we don't want to get stuck on any of them. Right. So I wonder, you know, that just leads me to wonder if you want to talk about the integration of coming out of that a little bit and learning how to manage kind of a new state after you've been through that.
Before we go there, could you say something about the different, like the deflected risings? Because I feel like a lot of people that watch are probably curious about what's going on with them. And I've read in a couple of the books that, you know, Joan and the people that have worked with Swamiji, that it's typically the cases that you hear about that are very dramatic are because the rising is deflected. And so right. Trying to get to somewhere where it can't quite make it from that point. And so I wondered if you want to just give a little bit of context about that so we can people can understand.
There are in this system, which is Patanjali Kundalini Yoga Care, and when I was going through, Joan Harrigan, PhD in Knoxville, Tennessee, was the main person I interacted with because she was American and Swamiji was from Rishikesh. So she actually wrote a book called Kundalini Vidya by Joan Harrigan, which is has all the real details of each of these risings. But on the most general level, there's 2 deflected risings, one through Saraswati Nadi and one through Vajra Nadi. And the rest are, there's one through Sushumna Nadi, and then there's a very fine, rare Chitrini Nadi rising, and then some other variations which are much less common. But these 2 deflected risings cause a lot of symptoms in people, like body movements and pains and sometimes bliss, sometimes depression, all sorts of symptoms, because they're not in the main channel where they belong. They have somehow taken an alternate route, and the alternate route could have happened because of trauma. It could have happened through birth. It could have happened through esoteric practices that were not quite on the up and up. Some of these risings were cultivated by esoteric groups because they gave gifts. And one of the gifts of the Vajra rising is a lit up brain centers that produce great intelligence. And so that's a lovely gift to have. Also the gift of healing, which I had, the gift of channeling sometimes, psychic awareness, sensitivity, artistic sensitivity. I had all the gifts, and the downside was my system was getting burned out because the energy wasn't able to travel the way it needed to.
Yeah, and Dani, can you just like maybe give people a little context? Not everyone knows this language. So when you're talking about the nadis and the channels and the central channel, maybe just give people a little energetic anatomy lesson.
Yeah, the nadis are channels. I mean, they really are energy channels. There are 72,000, according to yogic literature, that are very fine, but there's some main big ones. And there's 6 that are used by Kundalini Shakti in her process from the base of the spine to the top of her head. And it's these 6 risings, in a sense, that give the flavor to your process. And within the risings, there are a lot of different variations because it works through the subtle body and the chakra system. And it could be stuck or moving in different places. And wherever it's stuck, it can create energetic or physical disturbance. And, you know, the journey from the base to the top of the head is considered on an energetic subtle level, the journey of Kundalini. And then there's a journey beyond.
Thank you.
And it works through the prana and subtle body system, the chakra system. It's much more complicated than I just made it, so.
Of course, yeah, I just want to acknowledge that a lot of people who are maybe hearing these words for the first time don't have an idea what we're talking about. And so, yeah, we have to start somewhere.
Yeah. And we can put links to your book and Joan's book for more resources and information in the description.
So Katrina, you were asking about integration. This was like a momentous spiritual moment for me. And I didn't realize at the time that 12 long years of integration would follow. And that's not uncommon, I've heard. The number 12 is actually fairly common when you read other people awakening stories. So this was considered the first step. And by the next day, I was in what Swamiji and Joan in Kundalini Vidya call the renovation and restoration phase. And this phase of process is jump-started by the Kundalini stabilizing here and working in the brain. And there's a map of the chakra system on the brains. So Kundalini is actively working from the brain center as a command center down into the subtle body and the chakra system, and also the physical body, to start to renew and renovate and repair these subtle bodies so that it can sustain awakening. And I came to them fairly burnt out, as I mentioned before, So this process took a long, long time. It took a long, long time. And I kept notes over the 12 years, and there were certainly other benchmarks and openings. And I received consultations. I had almost monthly consultations in the beginning. And then I would have maybe a couple of times a year consultation, and I received new practices to help me cope with the energetic shifts. What I would say to people out there is diet's really important. Rest is supremely important, because Kundalini Shakti will take the opportunity when you're resting to do the renovation work. So many people are trying to work and live a kind of normal life, and then their bodies get more depleted because they're not giving the time for rest so that this renovation process can happen. I also felt kind of depressed and lonely and weird and, I don't know, insecure until, there were various levels of emotion that came up due to the process. And I cultivated this ability to witness my process rather than get caught in the kind of whirlpool of it. And that happened over time. I began to realize I could survive this process. And most of my more turbulent years were post Makara point, which is the rising to here. And that rising, once you have it, never goes away. That's one thing that is stable. Your states might change. You might be happy, depressed, in bliss, or in pain, but the rising stays stable, which is a real gift.
Yeah, I've heard them say at that point, you're still experiencing like the tumult of the purging process, but that there's more distance from it.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and hopefully more and more times.
Yeah.
And other times you're in the middle of this process and you can't separate the wheat from the chaff. And you're just in it. And, it's nice to have helpers at that time to help you see that this too will pass and to see the major themes that you're healing, because you're emptying your karmic baggage at this point. Kundalini is helping you empty the karmic baggage from your energy body, from your subtle body where it's stored. So when something kind of comes up really big, it's because it's been opened and it's right in your face. And it's being opened so you can heal it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting how, like, literally, I've come to understand what like ego dissolution means through this process, and it's different to what I used to think. Like, I used to think your ego was like, I have an ego. But really, it's a personality, it's a series of beliefs that one adopts to protect themselves. And so as those things fall away, feeling so exposed while all this is happening, like while this purge is happening, and then there's no kind of like protective structure to hold it, it's very vulnerable and terrifying. So I think it's so critical to have support.
It can be terrifying without a construct. And for some people, that shell of the personality cracks and never comes back. And that can be very terrifying. Mm-hmm. And for others, you just don't know what to do with yourself because nothing fits. Nothing feels right. Everything feels false. And, you just can't find your lane. You can't find your groove. And the new you has not yet been stabilized. The you that acts without ego. Right. The you that is not attached to these personality constructs.
Right. Very disorienting.
Mm-hmm.
Very disorienting.
It helps to have other awakened people in your life. Yeah. And it can help to have a psychotherapist. It helps to have friends on the same path.
Yeah.
And being with people who are slightly ahead of you in the process, you can just feel the resonance of the peace within them, because eventually it all becomes quiet.
Yeah.
I can promise you that. Which gets me towards like the next stage of development. So between here and here, there's this whole journey that can take years. And when you read other awakening stories, it's often in the story. Well, for 5 years, I didn't talk to anybody, or for 5 years, I stayed home, or for 7 years, I was like this. And then gradually, I started to move back out into the world again. So there's also a number of different processes on the subtle level that are happening in very, very subtle nadis in your brain. As the Kundalini starts the upward movement to the top of the head, which is called Bindu or completion. And when Kundalini does complete there, there's an experience without an experiencer of oneness, of the unitive state. It's something that the mind and the personality can't grasp. Mm-hmm. And in a sense, you can't say, I am enlightened now, because there's no I that has that experience. It's an experience that doesn't have anything attached to it, of great vastness and unitive consciousness, or the all that is. And again, for some people, they stay very connected to that as permanent awareness. And for other people, it can fade again, and there's still more process. I like the phrase running and returning, which is from the Jewish tradition, running and returning to the place. Because for me, that place has never left. It's always present, but it feels to me that there is other things that are still being healed and other things that are being integrated. And there's a bleed through very often that I'm very aware of. I don't know if bleed through is the right word. It just permeates my waking reality, and gradually, more and more, that will probably be so.
Wow, it's so helpful to just hear your clarifying these different ways that things can happen to people. You know, I think through the journey Kate and I have been on together, just in speaking with people about their own experiences, it just validates that they're each so unique based on the person's trauma, and now understanding the context you're putting in, these 6 different ways that this could show up, and obviously just circumstances and the people who are in your life, and or the spiritual traditions you have, or whether you even have a framework or a decision to look at spirituality as a system at all. It's all such a unique, individualized process. And so I guess my question for you is, what's some advice you can give to someone who maybe doesn't have community for this yet, who doesn't have language for this yet, or identify with even maybe this language that we're using of awakening or Kundalini? Do you have any words of wisdom?
Sure, find like-minded others. You know, I think there's an epidemic of awakening going on also with our other epidemic. And there's great interviews on YouTube, you know, from awakened beings. So you can get the many different flavors right now. So it's not just reading books anymore. You can get a live transmission and see what you feel and notice in your own being as you listen to people. I also want to say that as far as I know, we carry our past life previous awakening of Kundalini into this life. I don't think I explained that. The reason I didn't feel much before is I had an awakening that was stable at the throat, but in the wrong channel. And it must have been stable enough, except I was exhausted for various reasons. But you also bring the gifts of your previous rising with you into your life. So if you had a favorable rising that had progressed pretty far, you would be probably a gifted person in the world. And I personally think that in each life, there's a moment when a person is really inquiring as to the nature of reality. And there's a longing that comes up in the heart that wants to know truth, that wants to know what is this all about? Why am I here? What's the nature of God/reality, source, the universe? And that's when things start to pop. I think that if you have that sincere and deep longing, you'll be guided to the exact right person or place for you.
I love that. It's so innocent. It's so innocent. Just returning to our innocence and our curiosity and our not knowing, and owning that we don't know, but we're curious and we want to explore, and being on the path of the seeker.
And also that the universe is literally wired to respond to every sincere seeker with help. Right. It might not happen the way it did for me, but help will show up if you really are earnest and sincere in your seeking. Yeah. And I also want to mention now that since Swamiji has passed, Joan Harrigan has retired, and there's a woman in both, she goes between Austria and Rishikesh, India, who is a lineage holder of this lineage. And perhaps later you'll post the contact info. And it's a rather large commitment to practice and to your spiritual growth to work with her in that way. So she's the lineage holder at this moment. Right. And she's the one that's trained to look at the histories and figure out which rising the person has, right. Which is why I don't do it. I'm not trained that way. Right. But I do help people as a healer and counselor. I've been helping people integrate integrate and deal with the symptoms of trauma or shaking or body stuff or diet or other things. I'm just not working in that manner, but I am able to help people with certain integration issues. Yeah. And you're creating a course that's. Yeah, I'm creating a course, a 7-module course sometime for January. And anybody who's interested, actually the website I use most is daniantman.com because it's my main website. And if people join the mailing list, I don't mail a lot of emails, but they'll get information about the January course for integration. It's a body-oriented course to help the body open to be a receiver of this gift of awakening, to be a sound vessel for awakening.
What a wonderful gift that you're able to teach. I'm so glad to learn of you and your work in the world. And isn't it something how our own processes lead us to giving back?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
So Dani, I'm curious, based on what you've shared about your Jewish lineage, how do you understand your own rising?
You know, ever since I was little, I have had a complicated relationship with the Jewish religion, a kind of push-pull and a reluctance to delve fully in. And I always, even as a child, felt a certain sadness or grief around the religion, which I understood as an adult to have been linked to the Holocaust, of course, because I was born in the mid-50s and the Holocaust was barely 10 years before that. So the religion that I was born into had a lot of sadness around it. But when I met Swamiji, with his capacity for seeing, he told me that I had had a past life where I was exiled from my tribe and left for dead, basically, and that it had been a fall from grace. And when he told me that, I burst into tears. It was such a true seeing, but it wasn't anything I knew intellectually. I knew it as a soul. And I've been unraveling that connection for a good 18 years at this point. And I've been unraveling it in 2 directions. I've seen some of the past as I've been meditating and doing my process. I've had a lot of insights into why that happened, some of which had to do with teaching about unity consciousness in a community that was really following the law to the letter, but not that interested in having individuals embody unity conscious. And I think I got killed for it. And the other side was I went back and got bat mitzvahed at age 56 and learned about my religion, which I hadn't done at age 13, the traditional age. So, and I've studied Hebrew and Hebrew chant, and I've done art with Hebrew letters. So the mystical side of the tradition has come into me, and I absolutely love it and have more things to figure out about it and its interaction with this this vessel. And at the same time, when you do realize unitive consciousness, cultural religious practice doesn't have the same hold for me as it would for others. I don't find that I am drawn to it because my own inner process is really deep and satisfying. Mm-hmm. I meditate daily and go into the one with the one, and that is more than enough for me. I don't need the ritual or the services, but when I do participate, they touch me. And it's the energy of the tradition that comes in, which is quite lovely. So it's interesting. I think on this Kundalini journey, you go from monotheism to monism. There is but one. It's not there's one God, there's just one. Mm. And that shift kind of takes the inner need for religion down a two notches because you're experiencing the one. And there's no questing after that. You're not looking for anything.
I wonder, you've had a couple different teachers throughout your lifetime, and if you have anything to say, because, everybody's got an opinion and everybody's calling themselves an expert these days about how to recognize our true helper guide.
Yeah. I think the true helper comes to you unbidden sometimes, or perhaps you're seeking and the recognition is in the heart, where something so deeply resonates with you in some important way. Either it's the teachings or the teacher, but you're so excited and you just know that this is the right next step. One could go through an intellectual process of testing a teacher. You decide you're Buddhist, you find a Buddhist retreat center, you see what the teachers are like, and maybe that dawns upon you gradually through your own practice. Yeah. But I haven't had that experience. It seems like I was led very organically from teacher to teacher. They would just show up, and that would be the next step. Yeah. And I've heard that from people too. That, the next step just shows up when you're really looking and longing.
Yeah.
The false teachers are harder to discern because they can look like good teachers. And I have had one really kind of painful experience with that. And I didn't know right away. It took a while to know that it was not good.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so important. We keep coming back to that, the importance of your own discernment and looking for support and guidance, and also trusting yourself and your discernment. And I think, when you're in that open state, it can be so easy to just want to attach to a teacher or belief system, and empowering yourself to come back to discernment and finding, like you said, the trusted others who maybe have been there before you, to help you stay true to yourself and your path, I think is such a valuable piece of wisdom.
Yeah. And the other source I would share with everyone is Association for Spiritual Integrity.org, ASI.org, I think. And it was started by 4 people that are very interested in having a model for spiritual integrity, because there have been so many scandals in the spiritual world, sexual, money, power. Really, like the Me Too movement, it's being exposed in the spiritual world. So if anybody out there is having doubts or having had abusive experiences, there's a resource for that. But they don't do therapy, and they're not like policing teachers, but there's a really good ethical write-up about, the ethical parameters that spiritual teachers should hold. And if you're in trouble with a teacher, get therapeutic help would be my advice.
Yeah.
Because all your own inner issues are being projected, as you said, onto a teacher.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Ultimately, this process is teaching us to be our own teacher and have the answers we find come from within, which is a whole journey. So
Your own connection to source, to know source.
yeah, totally. Well, if people want to work with you, they can just go to your website and
Yep.
book a session or email you, get in touch.
They can book on the website. I work on Zoom all the time now because of COVID, but I always worked on Zoom. So
Yeah.
I've always had a long distance healing practice. And I've been doing a lot of work with people in the awakening realms at this point in time.
That's great. And they can get on your newsletter to know when this course is coming out next year. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being with us. It's always
you.
Yes.
We should do it again.
And I can't wait to see the finished film. Whenever it is meant to be born, it will.
We can't either.
Thank you so much for connecting with us. It's such a gift to know you and to hear about your journey. And yeah, I look forward to keeping the connection here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.